You don't get the decade you wish for. You get the decade you decide for, and most people never decide. They drift. They negotiate with comfort. They postpone the hard choice until the hard choice becomes their life. Jim Rohn used to say, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." That is not a cute quote for a coffee mug. That is a warning label for your future. Because if you do not consciously choose your influences will unconsciously choose your outcomes. You think your life is shaped by luck, by the economy, by your family, by your past. No, your life is shaped by decisions, small ones, quiet ones, repeated ones, the kind nobody applauds, the kind nobody sees, the kind that over 10 years turn into a completely different identity. A decade is not 10 years. A decade is 10 years of compounded decisions. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The decision that will define your next 10 years is not dramatic. It is not glamorous. It is not a viral moment. It is the decision you make tonight. To read or to scroll, to plan or to drift, to confront or to avoid. You think one night doesn't matter. But 10 years is built out of nights. And before we go deeper, understand this. You are already in the middle of a decade-defining decision right now by listening, by thinking, by questioning, or by dismissing this as just another motivational video. The way you interpret this moment is shaping the next 10 years more than you realize. But there's a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. The first decision that defines your decade is the decision about who you become, not what you achieve. Most people chase goals. Very few choose identities. They say, "I want to make more money." They don't say, "I will become the kind of person who creates value." They say, "I want to get in shape." They don't say, "I will become disciplined." They say, "I want success." They don't say, "I will become useful." Your decade bends to your identity. Stoic philosophers understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, not to impress the world, but to correct his own character. He knew empires fall, reputations fade, but character compounds. Your identity is the soil, achievements are the fruit, and fruit without soil rots. So ask yourself not what you want in 10 years, but who you must become to deserve it. Because the decade will demand a price. And if you have not decided who you are, the price will break you. You must decide, are you someone who keeps promises to yourself, or someone who negotiates with your own standards? That decision alone will define everything. The person who keeps small promises builds self-trust. The person who breaks them builds quiet self-contempt, and self-contempt is invisible, but it corrodes your future from the inside. Now let's go further. The second decision that defines your decade is what you tolerate. You tolerate distractions, you tolerate average conversations, you tolerate environments that shrink you, and every day you tolerate something beneath your potential, you cast a vote for a smaller life. People think success is about what you do. It is more about what you refuse. Refuse gossip, refuse endless entertainment, refuse relationships that drain, refuse the voice in your head that says later, because tolerance is slow poison. It does not kill instantly, it kills gradually. A wasted hour becomes a wasted week. A wasted week becomes a wasted year. A wasted year becomes regret at 40. And regret is the heaviest currency in the world. But there is another layer most people never see. The third decision that defines your decade is what you study. In the next 10 years, you will consume thousands of hours of content, conversations, news, videos, books. The question is not whether you will be influenced. The question is by what? If you study comfort, you will master excuses. If you study wealth creation, you will see opportunities others miss. If you study psychology, you will understand leverage. If you study discipline, you will understand freedom. Your mind is not neutral territory, it is a garden, and whatever you feed it will grow. 10 years of studying nonsense creates confusion. 10 years of studying mastery creates power. And here is where it becomes serious. Ignorance compounds just as powerfully as knowledge. Most people spend their 20s learning how to be entertained. They spend their 30s learning how to survive their mistakes. They spend their 40s wondering where the time went. But a small minority decides early, I will invest in skills that pay me back for decades. Skills are economic weapons: communication, sales, leadership, writing, investing, emotional control. These are decade-defining skills, and the earlier you decide to master them, the more time works for you instead of against you. But we are not done, because the fourth decision that defines your decade is how you handle pain. Pain is coming. It does not need an invitation. Failure, rejection, betrayal, loss, embarrassment. If you think you can avoid pain, you are already making a decade-destroying decision. The Stoics did not pray for easy lives, they trained for hard ones. When pain arrives, you will decide, does this make me bitter or does this make me better? That cliche has survived for a reason, because it is true. The person who uses pain as fuel accelerates. The person who uses pain as justification decays. One breakup creates a stronger, more focused individual. Another breakup creates someone who never trusts again. Same event, different decision, different decade. You cannot control what happens, but you absolutely control what meaning you attach to it. And meaning determines momentum. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. The fifth decision that defines your decade is the decision about your circle. You underestimate the gravitational pull of your environment. If you are surrounded by people who complain, you will normalize complaining. If you are surrounded by people who build, you will feel uncomfortable not building. Comfort is contagious. So is ambition. This is not about abandoning everyone you know. It is about being intentional, about asking, are the conversations around me expanding my thinking or shrinking it? If the dominant theme in your circle is survival, your decade will be about survival. If the dominant theme is growth, your decade will be about growth. And here is the brutal part. Sometimes you outgrow people, and growth feels like betrayal to those who choose stagnation. You must decide whether you want approval or advancement. You rarely get both at the same time. Now listen carefully, because this decision is subtle. The sixth decision that defines your decade is how you view time. Most people treat time like it is renewable. It is not. You can earn back money. You can rebuild reputation. You cannot recover yesterday. A decade is 3,650 days. That sounds like a lot. It is not. It is 3,650 opportunities to either build or decay. You say, I have time. No, you have today. The person who respects time lives urgently but calmly. They do not rush recklessly. They move deliberately. They understand that small daily improvements become massive transformations. 1 hour a day of focused learning equals 365 hours a year. Over 10 years, that is 3,650 hours. That is mastery territory. You do not need extreme bursts of effort. You need consistent, intentional direction. But there is something even more critical. The seventh decision that defines your decade is your relationship with responsibility. You can blame or you can build. Blame feels good in the moment. It protects your ego. It explains your stagnation, but it locks you in place. Responsibility feels heavy. It strips excuses. It forces reflection, but it gives you power. When you say, it's my fault, you gain leverage, because if it is your fault, you can fix it. When you say, it's the system, you surrender. The world is not fair. That is not new information. The question is, will you use unfairness as fuel or as shelter? Every time you choose responsibility, you strengthen your internal foundation, and foundations determine how high you can build. But we still have not touched the most dangerous decision of all. The eighth decision that defines your decade is the standard you set for yourself when nobody is watching. Character is private discipline. You can post quotes. You can talk about goals. You can declare ambitions. But when the room is quiet and it is just you and your habits, that is where your decade is decided. Do you wake up when you said you would? Do you finish what you start? Do you tell the truth when lying would be easier? Nobody applauds those moments, but they compound. A decade of private discipline creates public results that look like magic. People will say, you're lucky. They will not see the mornings you didn't skip, the evenings you studied, the temptations you refused, and that is fine, because you are not building for applause. You are building for alignment. But there is another truth, and it is uncomfortable. The ninth decision that defines your decade is whether you choose short-term pleasure or long-term respect. Pleasure is immediate. Respect is delayed. Pleasure says, skip the workout. Respect says, train anyway. Pleasure says, spend it. Respect says, invest it. Pleasure says, say what feels good. Respect says, say what is true. Your future self is watching your present decisions like a silent judge. In 10 years, you will either thank yourself or resent yourself. Imagine meeting yourself a decade from now. Will that version of you say, thank you for staying disciplined? Or will they ask, why did you waste so much time? That future conversation is being scripted today. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. The 10th decision that defines your decade is what you do when motivation disappears. Because it will. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. If your life runs on emotion, it will collapse under stress. If your life runs on structure, it will survive storms, build routines, build systems, decide in advance who you are, so when you feel tired, you do not negotiate, you execute. This is not about becoming robotic. It is about becoming reliable. Reliable to your goals, reliable to your word, reliable to your own standards. Over 10 years, reliability beats intensity. 1 year of obsession followed by 9 years of inconsistency produces nothing. 10 years of steady progress produces transformation. And now let me show you the hidden thread connecting all of this. Every decision we discussed, identity, tolerance, study, pain, circle, time, responsibility, standards, discipline, they all answer one question. Do you live by default or by design? Default is easy. Design is intentional. Default scrolls. Design studies. Default complains. Design adapts. Default waits. Design moves. And here's the final layer. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And your systems are built out of decisions. Tiny, repeated, often boring decisions. The world celebrates breakthroughs. It ignores foundations. But foundations decide decades. Right now, you stand at a silent crossroads. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. The decision to read one more page, to make one uncomfortable call, to end one toxic habit, to start one small routine. You are not one decision away from changing your life. You are one consistent decision away from changing your decade. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. If you do not consciously decide, someone else will decide for you. Your employer will decide your schedule, algorithms will decide your attention, culture will decide your standards, friends will decide your ceiling. Indecision is a decision, and it always favors mediocrity. So decide. Decide who you are, decide what you stand for, decide what you will no longer tolerate, decide how you will use pain, decide how you will spend time, decide what skills you will master, decide what standards you will uphold in private, because 10 years from now, you will wake up in a life you built or a life you allowed. There is no neutral. And as this video ends, understand something profound. You don't need more information. You need commitment, not excitement. Commitment, not inspiration. Decision. Look at your current habits. They are clues. Look at your calendar. It is a map. Look at your circle. It is a forecast. If nothing changes, nothing changes. But if you change, truly change, your decade has no choice but to follow. So here is your call to action. Do not like this video and move on. Do not nod and forget. Choose one decision tonight that your future self will respect. One standard you raise. One distraction you eliminate. One skill you begin. One promise you keep. Write it down. Commit to it. Protect it. And tomorrow repeat. Because you don't get the decade you wish for. You get the decade you decide for. You think the first set of decisions is enough. Identity, discipline, circle, responsibility. You think once you understand those, the decade will automatically unfold in your favor. It won't, because knowing is not deciding, and deciding once is not deciding daily. You don't lose a decade in one dramatic collapse. You lose it in subtle compromises, in quiet justifications, in the sentence, just this once. That sentence has stolen more potential than failure ever could. You say, I'll start next month. You say when things calm down. You say after this phase. But life does not calm down. It compounds. Responsibilities grow. Expectations increase. And if you have not trained yourself to act in chaos, chaos will train you to surrender. So let's go deeper. The next decision that defines your decade is the decision to think independently. Most people don't think. They absorb, they repeat, they echo headlines, trends, opinions. They inherit beliefs from family, culture, social media without ever interrogating them. But the person who defines their decade questions everything. Why do I believe this? Who benefits from me believing this? Is this belief expanding me or shrinking me? Independent thinking is dangerous. It isolates you at first. You will disagree with popular narratives. You will see opportunities where others see risk. You will reject paths that look safe but feel wrong. And people will say you are unrealistic or arrogant or naive. But the decade belongs to those who can stand alone long enough to build something that later attracts others. You cannot build an extraordinary life with borrowed thinking, but there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. The next decision that defines your decade is your relationship with comfort. Comfort is seductive. It whispers, not screams. It tells you you've done enough. It tells you you deserve a break. It tells you this is fine. And fine is the enemy of greatness. You don't need to suffer endlessly. This is not about punishing yourself. It is about understanding that growth requires friction. Muscles grow under resistance. Minds grow under challenge. Character grows under pressure. If you design a life that avoids all discomfort, you design a life that avoids all expansion. The gym is uncomfortable. Difficult conversations are uncomfortable. Building a business is uncomfortable. Admitting you were wrong is uncomfortable. But comfort today is regret tomorrow. Look at the people 10 years ahead of you, the ones stuck, the ones frustrated, the ones saying, I had potential. They didn't collapse overnight. They chose comfort repeatedly. And here is what nobody tells you. Comfort becomes a prison you decorate. You buy nicer furniture. You upgrade distractions. You call it stability. But deep inside, you know you stop stretching. That quiet dissatisfaction, that's not depression. That's unused capacity. Now listen carefully. Another decision that defines your decade is how you handle comparison. Comparison is a blade. It can sharpen you or cut you. If you compare to feel inferior, you shrink. If you compare to learn, you grow. Social media has amplified comparison to a dangerous level. You see highlights, announcements, celebrations, and you measure your behind the scenes against their curated moments. But remember this, you are not competing with their timeline, you are competing with your potential. The only comparison that matters is between who you are and who you could become. And that version of you is relentless. It does not care about excuses. It does not care about your comfort. It cares about alignment. 10 years from now, you will either be closer to that potential or further from it. And that gap will not be caused by talent. It will be caused by decisions. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. The next decision that defines your decade is how you deal with money. Money is not just currency. It is stored energy. It is time in financial form. If you spend every dollar you earn, you remain owned. Owned by bills, owned by urgency, owned by fear. But if you learn to control money, invest it, multiply it, you buy options. And options create freedom. This is not about greed. It is about leverage. The person who saves and invests early gives their future breathing room. The person who delays financial literacy pays for it with stress. You cannot ignore money for 10 years and expect peace. Learn how it works. Learn how it grows. Learn how it disappears. Because financial ignorance compounds just like financial wisdom. And here is the subtle part. Your relationship with money reflects your relationship with value. Do you create more value than you consume? That question alone will define your income over a decade. Now let's go deeper. Another decision that defines your decade is whether you become reactive or proactive. Reactive people live in response mode. They wake up and check notifications. They respond to emails. They handle crises. They chase deadlines. Proactive people design their day before the world interrupts it. They decide their priorities. They block time for deep work. They move before being pushed. Over a week, the difference seems small. Over a year, it becomes noticeable. Over a decade, it becomes destiny. Reactive living feels busy. Proactive living feels intentional. And busyness is not progress. You can run in circles for 10 years and call it hustle. But if you are not moving toward a clear direction, you are just exhausting yourself. Direction beats speed. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. The next decision that defines your decade is your willingness to be misunderstood. If you try to be understood by everyone, you will dilute yourself. Every bold decision creates confusion for someone. When you start a business, some will call it risky. When you invest in yourself, some will call it selfish. When you raise your standards, some will call you difficult. But the decade does not reward universal approval. It rewards focused commitment. You must decide whose opinion matters. Not everyone deserves a vote in your life. This is not arrogance, it is clarity. And clarity is expensive. It costs you comfort. It costs you validation. It costs you the illusion of belonging everywhere, but it gives you alignment. Now let's talk about something even heavier. Another decision that defines your decade is whether you confront your weaknesses or hide from them. Everyone has blind spots, emotional triggers, insecurities, patterns. Most people build lives around avoiding exposure. They avoid public speaking because they fear judgment. They avoid leadership because they fear responsibility. They avoid intimacy because they fear vulnerability. But avoidance shrinks your world. What you avoid controls you. If you want a powerful decade, you must run toward your weaknesses. Study them, expose them, strengthen them. Embarrassment lasts minutes. Regret lasts years. And here's the truth that stings. The areas you avoid most are often the areas with your greatest leverage. The skill you fear learning could multiply your income. The conversation you fear having could save your relationship. The risk you fear taking could unlock your independence. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. The next decision that defines your decade is how you treat your health. You cannot build a powerful life in a weak body. Energy is currency. If you neglect sleep, nutrition, movement, stress management, you will pay in focus, mood, and longevity. You think you are saving time by skipping workouts. You are borrowing exhaustion from your future. 10 years of neglect shows up suddenly: weight gain, chronic fatigue, irritability, reduced ambition. But 10 years of discipline shows up too: vitality, confidence, presence. Your body is not separate from your goals. It is the vehicle, and no vehicle runs well on neglect. Now understand this. Another decision that defines your decade is your tolerance for mediocrity and execution. Ideas are cheap. Execution is rare. Everyone has plans. Few follow through. The difference between the person who talks about writing a book and the one who writes it is not talent, it is daily output. Small daily output. 1 page a day becomes 365 pages a year. 1 sales call a day becomes 365 opportunities. 1 video a week becomes a brand. Consistency looks boring in the moment, but it looks extraordinary in hindsight. If you commit to showing up imperfectly but consistently, your decade will shock people, and they will call it overnight success. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. The final decision that defines your decade is whether you believe you are capable of more, because belief shapes action. If you secretly believe you are average, you will sabotage growth. You will hesitate. You will underprice. You will underperform. If you believe you can expand, you will attempt. You will stretch. You will persist longer. Belief is not delusion. It is permission. Permission to try. Permission to fail. Permission to improve. You do not need to see the whole path. You need to believe you can walk it. 10 years is long enough to become unrecognizable. Unrecognizable in skill, unrecognizable in confidence, unrecognizable in impact, but only if you decide. So here is what this all comes down to. You are not one lucky break away from a powerful decade. You are one disciplined decision, repeated daily, away from it. You don't need a new year. You don't need perfect conditions. You need clarity and courage. Tonight, while others scroll, you can plan. Tomorrow, while others complain, you can build. This year, while others drift, you can design. And 10 years from now, while others wonder what happened, you will know. Because you chose. You chose growth over comfort, responsibility over blame, discipline over emotion, vision over approval. And if you do nothing after hearing this, that is a decision too. A decision to stay the same. A decision to let time decide for you. A decision to wake up a decade from now and say, I wish. But if something in you feels restless right now, listen to it. That restlessness is not anxiety. It is potential demanding direction. So decide. Decide who you will become. Decide what you will no longer tolerate. Decide what you will build quietly for the next 10 years. And remember, you don't get the decade you wish for. You get the decade you decide for.